once again, welcome to Living in the 21st Century. Joining me today is Vadim Kravets. He is of Russian descent. Vadim, it's a pleasure to have you on today.
Likewise.
Beautiful.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, we had a very interesting conversation the last time we had an interview from Russian concepts and values pertaining to why there is this Ukrainian war. And even though I have some understanding from the Russian perspective, I am somewhat still trying to figure out what really makes sense. And we have victims at both sides. We have a lot of Russian militants and even in some cases, people that weren't supposed to be in the army went out there, fought on the battlefield, lost their lives. Or more than 600,000 Russians would have died, as far as I understood, according to Kyiv Independent. Also, we have tens of thousands, probably, I don't know the exact statistics on the Ukrainian lives that had been lost up to this point. However, though, even though both governments, Zelensky and Putin, have their philosophical and political views about what should be and what shouldn't be, does it really worth it considering the amount of lives that would have lost during this war for the past 2 years? Does it really worth it from a political standpoint?
I see what you mean. I've been thinking about this question. This is the question we've left last
yes,
time.
Exactly.
It's a very important question. I have to say because it addresses the core of the issues, and I think that I'm going to strip all the probably diplomatic or strip away all the diplomatic and minutia and get to the core of the issue in my answer, or attempt at least to do so. Each state, big state, has its national interests and a sense of national security. For Russia, what happened, the situation in Ukraine, at least in their perception of things, Ukraine presented an existential threat. So in other words, if it weren't addressed by Russia, it would lose, in their perception again, it would lose their country, and the chaos that would ensue as a result would take even more lives than what is being lost right now on the field. So Russia perceived Ukraine and what it has become as an existential threat to its existence, and hence the reaction of the Russian government. The reaction was a military reaction, which followed by some semblance of negotiation and an attempt to resolve this peacefully. So after the invasion, or so-called invasion of Russia, after it perceived its threat, negotiation ensued. And all of this conflict could have been averted if negotiation proceeded as planned, or at least the sides came to some sort of an agreement. And in Istanbul, in Turkey, such things did happen. The negotiation took place and almost resulted in some kind of a resolution of the matter. But unfortunately, Boris Johnson from England came and said there will be no concessions, none of that, and the war continued. So to reiterate what I said, Russia perceived a threat from Ukraine, because Ukraine started to join NATO. The NATO expansion went further east, and Ukraine became one of its probably center points. And Russia requested the West to reconsider such an action on their part. It was ignored, and Russia had to act militarily, because they say that war is the extension of the diplomacy by different means. And that's where we are. We are in the middle of the conflict that could have been averted, but it's not. Yeah. Okay. You see what I mean?
Yeah. So you said that Ukraine poses an existential threat to Russia.
Yes. In this war.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that is quite through, because if we clearly understood, Ukraine was considered probably one of the second largest militaries or third largest militaries in the world with nuclear weapons, and I mean, you name it, they have it all. On the other hand, they were asked to abandon, to destroy their nuclear sites, which prohibit them from developing further any more nuclear weapons that would pose this existential threat to Russia. So if that had been gone, I don't see the reason why Putin should have viewed this as this big threat to Russia. I never heard of any circumstances where Ukraine ever launched any attacks in the past or the present on Russia. But this war began from as early as 2014 when Putin invaded Crimea. And it seems that his intention wasn't just to settle with Crimea, but to assume the responsibility of getting the entire Ukraine. And that's how it came across to me. What is your opinion on that?
Well, the situation, of course, is complicated. Let me see. I think that, first of all, with Crimea, first of all, with the threat, whether Ukraine posed an existential threat to Russia or not, Ukraine submitted a request to become a NATO member, and
Right.
a lot of the things that were happening in Ukraine were pretty much a recalibration of Ukrainian military to adapt to NATO standards, training of the troops and everything, a lot of bases, equipment, and while all along the population has been indoctrinated in many ways, but I don't know if I should proceed with this, to hate the Russians. So Russia was perceived as a threat to Ukraine, and Ukrainians were very, very much intent on attacking Russia. Perhaps you can associate it with Russian takeover of Crimean Peninsula, potentially, but I think these sentiments existed in Ukraine since not just 2014. They existed there earlier. They just exacerbated in 2014 with the coup. But even if the Ukrainians had, legitimate reason to not like Russians for their actions in Crimea, Crimean Peninsula is something that needs to be elucidated further. Because number one, it is also a very strategic location for the Russian military. Crimean Peninsula allows for the control of a large portion of Russian territory if it were occupied by the NATO forces. So Russia, again, just coming from the real politic, from just interests and security of Russia, without any kind of legalities involved here, which we also can elucidate. Russia had to take control of Crimea in order to prevent, again, a threat that takeover by NATO of Crimean Peninsula posed to this. So the way it's presented, that Russia took over Crimea is also not true, because their troops always were stationed there. It rented Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine, which inherited it from the Soviet Union. In 1954, Khrushchev, just by his directive, passed Crimean Peninsula to the Soviet Republic of Ukraine. It had never been Ukraine prior to that. It has always been a Russian territory. But for some reason, he did that. In 2014, after the coup, there was a referendum held by the Crimean people, and they all voted to rejoin Russia, which they internally always felt gravity toward, because they are Russian people. So Crimean Peninsula legally sort of relocated to Russia. And that's from the standpoint of view of the international law. But you can also say that Russia needed to eliminate that threat by taking over Crimean territory, so that, the threat of NATO takeover is eliminated. So perhaps the Ukrainians have some kind of a claim on it and a negative sentiment toward Russia as a result of it. But you have to, again, realize that Russia is a large country with almost unlimited resources and its personal sort of state interests. Such things cannot be discounted by whichever country is adjacent to it. And negotiations is the only way to resolve some of these things, So if negotiations took place between Russia, Ukraine, and the Western world, as they should have been, all this conflict could have been averted, even with some concessions from Ukraine.
So you were saying earlier that Russia believes that NATO allies is a threat to Russia.
Yes.
And we can also say the same thing about Russia, right? Here's the philosophy. I don't really think that NATO nations is this humongous threat to Russia. I think it comes down to democracy versus dictatorship. Mm-hmm. And under the dictatorship standard or system of doing things, it somewhat has nothing in common with democracy. From my philosophical perspective, I believe that they're two total opposites. And as long as that exists, they're going to always be enemies. For example, Putin wants to be the leader of the free world. The U.S. president wants to be the leader of the free world. And the world constantly keep their eyes on these two leaders, Russia and the United States, who is really the leader of the free world. Russia becomes the biggest threat because they have more nuclear bombs than United States. And these kind of things has every nation in the NATO allies on the alert. Mm-hmm. But I still trying to figure out, because no one is going to jump Russia for the sake of jumping Russia, knowing that they have a ton of nuclear bombs that they can launch at any given time and defend themselves. I don't see any crazy person doing that. However, though, the notion that the NATO allies is this existential threat to Russia, I still can't figure it out. It doesn't matter how we dice it, however we look at it, I still don't see the threat. None of them thus far had ever attacked Russia. Since the USSR had been broken apart, everyone took up their own sovereignty and ran their nation as a sovereign country, and would have expected that sovereignty be respected among each other. However, I think Putin has this old philosophical concept that we want to reestablish the USSR, and I frankly don't think that anyone is looking back at the old Soviet Union. People want to move ahead and live a normal life. They want to, and we are talking about the citizens, not a political concept or philosophy. The people of both Russia, people of Crimea, the people of Ukraine, whatever they are, they want to live a normal life without uproar and figuring that bombs are coming at them and their ability to tear apart, or running for refugees, as a refugee for shelter. No one in the 21st century want to live that. Wars now are fought on more economic turf now than opposed to people bombing each nation back to the Stone Cold Ages. Nobody wants to experience that. Modern human beings want to live a life that is conducive of cultural, economical, moral, spiritual development in harmony in their environment. Not to be running in this time. It doesn't make sense. And I'll be straight with Vadim. I believe in the past couple of years, we got lunatics at the forefront of the world. We got a lunatic in China. We have a lunatic in Russia. We had a lunatic in the United States, and we got a lunatic in North Korea. We were run in a nation, among nations, nuclear nations that full of power and might in one way or the other, they are run by lunatics, right? And it's sad to see that when people are brainwashed under a certain regime for so many years, they can't come to full grips to have the full vision of what's going on. They are somewhat brainwashed. I think humanity is tired of wars. People want to live comfortable. They want to get kids, start a family, send them to school, not run through bushes with grenades and guns and so forth. And all that brings me to this point. Do you really think the Russian people is happy with this this war that's going on right now with Ukraine and Russia?
No, they're not happy with that because the people populating both Ukraine and Russia are pretty much the same people. If you want to view it in the context of Russia-Ukraine only, I would even classify it as a civil war in some ways, because people with divergent views, same people with divergent views on how things should operate in their lives, fighting each other, which is very sad. It's a tragedy that, Russian and Ukrainian people are fighting each other and cannot find a way to a consensus, to some sort of negotiating thing. But unfortunately, the issue is a larger issue. You brought up democracy, and you said that there are leaders on that side of the aisle, so to speak, that are bloodthirsty, so to speak, and such as Putin, Kim, and others, China. But I think that people often overlook a larger context of things, and I'll try to explain. Mm-hmm. We are going through a great, probably in historical terms, economic and civilizational change. Countries such as Russia, China, and few others east, they recognize themselves as independent civilizations and want to assume a proper niche in global balance of things. So the dominance, 500-year-old dominance of the Western culture is coming to an end. It's almost a tectonic shift. And we can speak of democracies, of course. It's a philosophical concept, and it's very difficult to discern in the short period of time that we have allotted to us. What is democracy? What is not democracy? It's going to become an endless situation. But what we have to look at is that the dominance of the Western view is eroding, and with that, like Putin said, we're in the middle of a tectonic shift, and such shifts usually are accompanied by either a large global war or a series of high-intensity small local conflicts, and that is what we're seeing. We're seeing shifts in a global balance of power, economy, and model of human development. This is as large as this. So from that standpoint, I see some inevitability in the conflicts that are erupting globally, because the old system never gives up without a fight. And that fight is going on. Of course, in the West, it's common to perceive it as, lunacy from the other side. But I can assure you that Putin didn't wake up one night and decided to just invade Ukraine. People have to realize that there are reasons and causes that led, certain events that led for such a grave decision to be made. Generally, in the Western media, Putin and other leaders of the East are portrayed as some kind of cartoonish dictators. It's silly, but it's not true. And by underestimating and not trying to understand the psychology of the decision making on the other part, people lose a large chunk of understanding the world in which they live. And it's very important, because in the end, you want to end up on the right side of the history, and you don't want to be fooled by misconceptions and propaganda, wherever it may be coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I understand you clearly. If we go back right here to Britain, when Great Britain was established as an empire, and had so many different countries around the world as colonies and so forth, some of these countries became independent. They still acknowledges Great Britain as their monarchy until some become republic. In the process of doing that, though, even up to this moment, the respect and understanding of those nations traveling back and forth and having social activities together, everybody understanding their culture, their roots, and they're living in harmony. Why could it not we have the same thing with Russia and Ukraine? We understand the old philosophical differences and who they were before and who owned this and who owned that. But why can't it be a common understanding, that you can have both Ukrainians and Russians and back and forth to each other country and sharing economic wealth as one commonwealth? Why couldn't we have that kind of atmosphere opposed to be going after the ownership of this particular place? Now, I know it's difficult sometimes to talk about democracy and dictatorship, because if you analyze it from a philosophical standpoint, there's a lot of dictatorial standards that exist in democracy also. It named democracy, but there's still a lot of dictatorship embedded in the framework of democracy. But the word democracy get to people's mind, and they say, oh, we live in a free place and we this and that and that. But in reality, if you really have to comb through it for fine-teeth comb, you'll recognize that you're a democracy, and so you don't have so much democratic rights after all, right? That a government says it all. And I'm just looking from the standpoint that humanity has to look at the devil in the details, if we want to put it that way. That we want to have ownership in this, just like Adolf Hitler. He wanted to conquer the whole world and get this nation. And we don't understand the rationale. We were put on Earth to enjoy what Earth has to give us, right? Not to really claim it, not to be an owner of it, because we're going to die and leave it someday, right? And we can't take it with us. Why can't we just love each other as a people? Whether you are a Russian, American, Ukrainian, Chinese, wherever you come from, enjoy this big planet as one planet that God give us all. Don't fight to claim your brotherland. Don't covet your brotherland. If there was a breakaway of philosophical difference before, I understand that. Don't try to reinvent the wheel now, but try to have a common understanding. You know what? Let us all live in harmony and peace. That's what it was before, but this is what it is now. Just let's get ahead with our lives. I think more billions and billions of dollars are spent in war and destroying lives than actually preserving lives. And these are the things that I really get at in my interviews, because I don't think we were made to destroy each other. We all need each other in one way or the other. Put the political differences apart. Yeah, we're going to get problems. We ain't always got a leader that we like. We ain't always get what we want. But there has to be common ground and respect among each other. Now, I don't know, Vadim. I just talk from my insight, so I'll listen to you again. Go right ahead.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Errol. I think that even before World War I, many of the thinkers and authors felt that after the meat grinders that preceded the World War I, such an atrocity as a war was no longer possible. And yet here we were, World War I took place, and it was the biggest meat grinder of all back then known to people. And I think that generally normal people do not want the war. They want to avoid it at all costs. I think that, diplomacy, like I said, war is the extension of diplomacy by different means. I think that when all diplomatic channels have been exhausted, this is the last resort. Why couldn't have been accomplished? Why the agreement or some kind of a consensus and peaceful resolution of things? I don't know. I only can assume that there are certain interests that prevented it from happening. Certain people for whom the war that took place in some way is beneficial, or in pursuing whichever objectives. That was the end. Because Russia always did, like I said, agreements, Minsk agreements, Istanbul agreements, they constantly try to extend their, the olive branch in order to resolve issues, and it hasn't happened. One must ask why.
There shouldn't have to be issues, though, right? We have a sovereign nation on its own. We have Russia as a sovereign nation. They defend themselves. I believe the mechanism of defense is when you prohibit someone from coming to your territories to destroy what you own. But when you leave your boundaries to go on someone else's territories, to fight them and destroy their lives and their ways of living, that is not extending an olive branch. The olive branch, I believe, that need to be extended is the olive branch of respect and peace. That olive branch goes a long way, because then with respect and peace, both the Russians and Ukrainians, which is very close, obviously, as a people, will be able to integrate and continue to live culturally and let their differences be played out among themselves, not by government destroying each other. We've done the last minute. I give you the last say.
Well, the United Nations has been established in order to prevent something like this from happening. But I think that its role and its significance has been eroded over the past, let's say, 25 years. The war in Iraq, the bombing of Yugoslavia and Libya and everything, unilateral decisions have been made, and the countries have been bombed by and destroyed by NATO. And that is why the threat perceived by Russia and the inevitability of this war was something that, unfortunately, we could not, I guess, avert. So that's my last word. But I'm hoping that, you see.
Okay, well, Vadim, it's a pleasure having you on. We come to the last couple of seconds down on the clock. I'm sure we'll be having some very interesting conversations, and we carry on in the future. And for all those who have been tuning in or living in the 21st century, I want to say to you, have a blessed day. Take good care.